So here in the 7th chapter of Mark, Jesus has a run-in with uptight religious people. Jesus and his disciples were sitting around taking a little breather from their ongoing ministry, and they were sharing a meal. And then a few Pharisees, Jewish religious authorities, elites, they noticed them. And they specifically noticed that the disciples skipped a traditional mealtime custom and were therefore eating with, quote, defiled hands. The custom that they skipped, they did not ritually clean their hands prior to eating. And we're talking like ritual ceremonial washing, not sanitation. And in this historical context, for Jewish people to eat without doing that ritual was abnormal. According to the Pharisees, Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. So they condescended Jesus and the disciples with an accusatory question. Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders? And Jesus responded to them by quoting the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah. Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, in vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrine. Jesus, in that response, is effectively saying, you are taking made-up human traditions, and you're acting like God invented them. Vintage Jesus. The ultra-religious were trying to expose him, and he used a religious text to expose them. And I just love imagining this scene. And I'm going to make a lot of assumptions here, so please indulge me. But I just see Jesus sitting and eating quietly. And then a bunch of self-righteous religious prudes come up and they ask a judgy question. And Jesus, calm and cool, is basically like, nah, that's nonsense. The tradition you reference to shame us isn't even biblical. And then Jesus continued with an even deeper critique. Not only is this rule made up, the whole concept of performing certain rituals or living a non-traditional or traditional lifestyle, making a person worthy or unworthy, holy or unholy, is a bogus concept. Jesus clarified with a rebuttal. He said, do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile? For it is from within the human heart that evil intentions come. That is what makes us holy or unholy. So to recap all that, on little to no biblical grounding, religious people were criticizing other people's lifestyles. What's new? Am I right? The Christian church and its Christians still do this all the time. Oh, you go to the casino? Oh, you sing those songs? Oh, you go to the bar? Oh, your skirt is that high? Oh, you love that person? Oh, you hang out with them? Oh, you have tattoos and piercings? Oh, you have defiled hands. See what I mean? And here Jesus is saying that if we're going to assess a person or ourselves as wrong or right, good or bad, then meaningless traditions and made-up cultural norms, especially non-biblical ones, are not the determining factors. What are the factors that make a behavior unholy or holy? Or what are the factors that make a behavior specifically unholy? Well, Jesus offers us a list in his response. He says, destructive deeds, such as fornication, theft, murder, avarice, greed, licentiousness, wastefulness, deceit, envy, slander, and the like. I want us all to note the common denominator in Jesus' list of what is unholy behavior. All those behaviors have to do with harming people. Therefore, sin, defilement, or what is wrong or evil has nothing to do with meaningless rituals or cultural priorities or fads, but has everything to do with being hurtful or helpful to others. Evil is as evil does to the neighbor. Living faithfully, in other words, isn't about doing what's always been done, and neither is it about doing what is new, cool, and edgy. It is always about advocating for life, for the well-being of our community and God's people. And that's the climactic point that Jesus is making. He's offering us an implied definition of sin, of what misses the mark. And he's also offering a critique of religion and culture. And he says when religion or the church or culture prioritizes things, traditions, or meaningless activities over the pursuit of building up relationships and serving our neighbor, well, that is what finally is defiled. Again, this teaching point can stretch beyond just church and religion. Our consumerist culture has a word for undefiled or holy. And our consumerist culture has a word for that, and that word is success. And when we hear someone called successful, in our cultural language, that means they're holy, they're undefiled. And the logic of our time is that success is determined by what we have or do not have. We often judge people or ourselves by income brackets. We measure success by how many things a person has, by what they wear, by games that they won, yardage gained, home runs hit, social status and popularity achieved. We say that they're holy and undefiled by how many products they've sold, the cars they drive, and job titles they hold, and all other sorts of superficial ways. But here in this text, Jesus is offering a critique of all of that. None of those things make one defiled or undefiled, successful or failure. How we treat our neighbor does. And imagine if we actually believed Jesus' standard for holiness or for success. Well then, success would be measured not by wealth accumulated, but by percentage of money given away. It would be measured by how well we clothe the naked and shelter the homeless, not by what we wear or how big our house is. It would not be determined by what job titles we have or degrees we've obtained, but by what we've done with them for others. It would not be determined by what social, academic, or business status we've achieved, but by what status we've given our neighbor. And our epistle of James, as Deb said so rightly, gets really specific on this point. James says, if you want to be pure and undefiled, especially if it's your religion, then care for the orphans and the widows in distress. Care for the marginalized and the oppressed and the outcast. Care for the people that it's not easy to like or love. And now, if you're anything like me, upon all of that, you might be feeling a bit self-conscious and insecure about all this. And I got to say, this isn't a real mercy-filled moment for Jesus. This is a downright scolding of religious people. So if you and I feel self-conscious here, I think that's the point. Jesus is scolding people, religious people particularly, to get back on track, to care about the things that matter, to care about the things that affect our neighbors and cause them to suffer. Jesus is calling us out for our absurd standards of what is holy and successful and what deserves our attention. He's calling us out for our self-righteous religious attitudes. And for that, we should feel bad. And for where we've erred. But sisters and brothers, this isn't to browbeat you and I into shame and abuse. Rather, it's about truth-telling. It's about admitting who we have and have not been, letting it come to surface and naming it. And that's always where the good news will then come in. Because after calling us out, what does our Christ ultimately do in the gospel? He eventually goes to the cross for those whom he's called out. So if you feel called out today, know that Christ goes and went to the cross for you. Because he gives us law, and then he gives us gospel. We may not always be the church or the individuals that God needs us and calls us to be. We may fall into the traps of holding tightly to meaningless traditions or bad definitions of success or worry about things more than our neighbor. But here Jesus is calling us out and calling us in with love and with grace. And sisters and brothers, from that grace, may we rise up from our guilt and our embarrassment and breathe in new life and go back out there and try to do better. Not for the sake of our salvation, that's already won and secured, but for the sake of our neighbor who suffers. Amen.